All right, this is Danny Zofness. I'm the producer of the podcast. So this is episode 4. The first 3 episodes we did were made for Mac to kind of introduce himself, get used to being on the mic, get used to the whole operation we're doing here. From this point on, and especially when we have guests, which will hopefully be most of the episodes moving forward, I'm going to be part of the podcast. I'm going to be kind of like a mediator, host in the way of I'll be here to kind of steer the discussion to make sure everyone's staying on task. Mac's strengths lie in the way of sharing his experiences through his journey with mental health and mental illness and addiction, all these things. And we kind of decided that it'd be best if Mac was able to focus on that and be able to engage with our guests in a more engaged way. So the idea is moving forward, I'll be the mediator of the episodes. Mac will share his experience, his anecdotal experiences through his mental health journey, and then the expert or the guest we have on, depending on if it's an expert, professional, or another person like Mac who just has their own experiences, they'll share the facts, the solutions, and or just go back and forth with their experiences. That's kind of the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, almost like an orator,
right?
An orator, a host of a debate, except
not a debate.
Well, and I probably need to be reeled in about as much as some of the candidates in these debates.
Exactly.
So, yeah, but we definitely have found that our chemistry works. We're aligning with the chemistry of our strengths a little bit more,
right? So
that this can be easier for you guys to take
in.
And
to really reach here, I do think also that even in life, it's like so we had this idea for this podcast originally, right? And it's already progressed and manifested to something a little bit different than we expected. So as a little kind of like tip or just a way to kind of reach in what we're doing here, it's like, give yourself a break. Like, even though you have ideas, goals, and things like that, on the journey to get to those goals or on the path to get to where you want to be, things are going to change. Just be willing to adjust and make the best of it, kind of like what we're doing right now. So for this episode, we're going to kind of do 2 things. We're going to get to know me a little bit, and Mac and I are going to talk like we normally do and share our just share with each other and kind of chit chat back and forth. So one thing that a little bit about me. So I'm from here in St. Louis, raised in Crestwood till 5th grade, moved to Kirkwood in 5th grade, which was a big moment in my life. I'm a dad. I've got an 8-year-old daughter. I have been taking photos and videos professionally since 2010. Before that, I worked in the education field, not as a teacher, but as a support staff. I found myself a lot of the times when I was at the high school I worked at, telling kids to follow their dream, follow their passion, do what they love. And even though I loved working with kids, it was not my full dream or my full passion. My full passion was always to use a camera. From a very young age, we had access to an old school over-the-shoulder VHS camcorder, which I fucking loved, and I begged my dad to use it. And as I got older and older, he would let me play with it and use it. And I really did, find that I just loved it. I've always known I wanted to use a camera. So I've been doing that since 2010. Mac, let me ask you this. For you, we know a lot about you as far as you were diagnosed with ADD and these things, ADHD when you were in 2nd grade. And from that point, you kind of knew it and were aware of it. For you, the things you're passionate about now, fashion, sneakers now, mental health and addiction, obviously not the mental health and addiction part, but with the fashion stuff, at what point did you kind of realize you had a passion? Or I guess what I want to know is, when did you discover your passion and how have you applied that to your life?
Wow, I wasn't expecting that. It's an incredible question to get to ask, because my relationship with my relationship that I didn't really know that started existing and then became the only relationship that I had with the mental health struggles and addiction came after me knowing and realizing my passions were in creating, right? So the very first thing that I ever wanted to be, other than a knight and a cowboy, obviously, the very first thing that I ever wanted to be was a photographer.
Yeah, really.
I wanted to be, I wasn't interested enough in science to be, kids who love animals want to be a marine biologist or zoologist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Marlon Perkins, the guy that started the St. Louis Zoo, was my idol.
Really?
I wrote a book report on him in 3rd grade or 4th grade, and then ever since then, it was I wanted to run a zoo, but I didn't care about the science. I didn't want to do that path. So I thought, what could get me to all the coolest places all over the world and see animals. And I wanted to be a National Geographic photographer.
Wow.
And that's what I wanted to be for. But I wanted to be that throughout all like childhood and adolescence, right? Never to the point where then I got a camera. My mom was really big into photography when we were growing up too. She had cameras all over the place.
Does
all
she
the
still
time.
have any of them?
Yeah. Well, she does. I don't know if any of them, if there would be any that would pique your interest.
They'll be peaking.
But then that led me that, like, I was the kid who the books that I wanted for Christmas were dog encyclopedias and animal encyclopedias. I wanted to know all the specs about different animals. I invented my own animals, that kind of stuff. Like, I was really into wildlife, really into the environment. And even though fashion now is kind of counterintuitive to the environment because it is such a wasteful industry, I was always really big on that. And that's big in my family. We had 1 million pets. It was like Swiss Family Robinson with fucking animals. But when I got to middle school and I started getting into music, that's when I started getting into fashion and being this like kid in U City, that, you know, the whole story you guys have already heard. I wanted to be a skater. I also wanted to be a b-boy. I also wanted to be a prep. I loved the biggest thing that stood out to me about all these different social groups were the ways that people chose to express themselves. And by high school, I was really big into art. I did graffiti. I tagged, and I drew guys and I drew outfits. I drew clothes all the time. And the only other thing that I ever wanted to be other than a photographer was that once I started getting into high school, by freshman year, I wanted to design shoes. I wanted to work for Nike. And I took that through to freshman and sophomore year of college in fashion design. But all that stuff fell to the wayside and was like a far second from partying, drinking, and drugging, right? So like, yeah, I went to school for fashion design, but like, once I started having to use a sewing machine and make something other than what I wanted, when I had to like make a pattern for a
like
blouse,
learn the craft kind of
yeah,
thing.
when I had to make I liked learning the craft, but I didn't want to make a blouse. I didn't want to make I was that kid, you know. I was like, just put me in the industrial design and let me draw shoes and figure it out.
What's interesting is as you're telling this part of your little story here, what I'm noticing is that, like, although the chameleon thing that you mentioned, like you want to do this, you want to do that, although it has its downsides, I also think that now at this point in your life and in your career, in some ways, it's like it's helping you tremendously, because I think you've developed a healthy relationship with it, right? Of being able to adapt in a way that, like, you are able to have like a vast network, and you are able to like connect with a lot of different kind of people relatively easily, or maybe more easily than other people. So I think that, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, it's interesting to me that your passion seems to come in the form of, whether you maybe are aware of it or not, and this is maybe just my point of view, but it comes in the form of like being able to connect with people and then hopefully create something, whether it's a tangible object or the wheelhouse scene or all that stuff, like to be able to create something that's bigger than you and the relationships that you have. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, and I think that this podcast is representative of that too, because you're right. In having all these like kind of strengths maybe that I didn't focus enough on, or I didn't keep drawing. And had I, at the rate that some of the guys that I look up to and admire and that we consider peers and colleagues now, the Basil Kincaids of the world, and guys that, you know, that I came up with, that I was tagging with, that are now like hyper successful contemporary artists, yeah, maybe I would be that talented, right? But I got like a little bit talented in a lot of things that I was really interested in, but in the process realized that the thing that I'm most talented in, and as cliche as this sounds, or corny or big picture, but the thing that I'm most talented in is in connecting people.
But that's important.
So, right, for sure. But so, like working with you, I go, this guy isn't, I'm interested in the things that this guy is best at. So let me amplify what he's best at by, you know, by connecting him with platforms
using
to do
your
it.
strengths.
Or like within Wheelhouse, it was like this, you know, this person is a huge personality, but can't keep a inventory sheet. He's basically me. Let me put him in a position for him to win.
Right.
You know, working with Brandon, where I see myself in Brandon and where I see you and Brandon are different, putting him in these positions to win. So yeah, that it has now, I mean, at 34, you know, it has now become definitely a strength. Originally, I think that it was the like,
it was not so easy, man.
Where can I fit in? Now it's like, where can I help everyone else fit in?
So one thing you're talking about too right now is the process of the journey, right? And I think that, you know, I was just, so my friend and I are writing this script, right? And last night we were writing pretty late. We were both tired as hell, and he kept being like, God, why didn't we just write it like this way the first time? I get so annoyed that we just didn't do it. And I kept being like, I was like, Will, man, I was like, we had to write the first 3 drafts to get to this whatever, I don't know, those were the right numbers, but we had to write these other drafts to get to this point. In the same way, it's like you had to, and we all have to like go through these things to get to where we're at now. And that sounds so like easy and cliche, and it's like, we wouldn't, we are here now only because of where we were before, and we wouldn't have been able to get here without being here before. It's like these very paradoxical, very like, I guess like simplistic things, but it's also like, I feel like that there is tremendous value in the attempt to be aware of the journey. So for you, at what point, for me, it's only been relatively recently in the last year or 2, maybe 3, that I've really been appreciative of the journey. For you, do you think you're appreciative of your journey, and do you have an idea or a recollection of when you became aware of like, okay, I had to go through this to get here?
I think it happens over and over again because I'm so, and I've become really aware of this and have tried to get better at it. Real quick, something that these guys are going to get sick of us saying is not just cliches, but the cliche that follows.
No more prefaces.
No. Yeah, I mean, but I think it's important to point out that like when we say stuff that's been regurgitated over and over and over again, we're saying it for the same reason that anyone else is. Like when you and I tell people to embrace a journey, and they are rolling their eyes because they saw it on Insta quote. The reason that these things have become cliches is because bottom line is they work.
They do.
And if we spend our time, which I used to do a lot, trying to say things different or better instead of just making sure that more people are getting the right message. Yeah. I think we can get lost in the sauce.
You're right.
But that wasn't a correction to you. But to bring it back to what you were asking about the journey,
value of the journey.
For me, the value of the journey for me, I would like to say, I realized it once I got sober. I realized it because all that stuff all the worst stuff in my life got me to the best point in my life. But this last 2 years, and a lot of people that do pay close attention, which I really appreciate. The last 2 years of my life have had, immense emotional trauma on me, and I've lost a lot of friends and lost a lot of relationships and done a lot of things that I'm ashamed of, and treated a lot of people that I cared about really poorly. And I don't think that while I was in it, there was very few times that while I was in it for these last 2 years that I understood that it was important, because I was so deep in it.
Isn't that something?
But the second that it started coming together, even before all this great news over these last 2 weeks, but the second that it started coming together, the light bulb did come back on again, and it was like you fucking knew this, man. Like you fucking knew that this was all temporary. You knew that this was all going to lead to something else.
Right.
You knew it was all going to give you more perspective.
Right.
But I was so deep in it at different points in time, and trying to listen to my therapist as much as I can, to sit in the discomfort. Don't worry about what it's for. Sit in the discomfort, and I'm not. You can tell if I'm trying to sit in my discomfort, there's probably 100 posts on my story.
Right, and that's I'm glad you brought that part of this up, because it's like only very recently have I. So you talked about just now being in certain moments, especially the ones that aren't easy. There's a certain level of acceptance you have to have, because that is what's happening, even though it's fucking hard as hell. And I feel like that only recently for me have I been able to be in those moments. And it happened just earlier this month, and like not know where my next paycheck's coming from, not knowing what my relationship with certain people in my life are going to become, or how they're going to evolve or not evolve, maybe. Being a dad, and it's like all I kept saying was in my head, it's okay, you got this. And I said it not in a way of like hopeful, but I said it in a way of like believing it, because I'm able to look back and realize when I was at even harder spots in my life, which was 2020, the summer and early fall. It's like, if I can get through that, being 5 months late on my rent, being having 5 months back rent that I hadn't paid yet, my relationship with my girlfriend at the time sadly falling apart, not being a very good dad. But if I can get through that, I can definitely get through a couple weeks of it. And when I say now to myself, it's okay, you got this, I say it not like I hope I got this, I'll be okay. It's more like, I'm okay, I got this. Like I know it to be true. One thing that does not help me when these things happen is my anxiety and depression, right? I was diagnosed with anxiety. I was diagnosed with an extreme anxiety disorder, depression, and very mild OCD when I was I want to say 15 or 16. At the time, I was kind of like, all right, cool, this makes sense now. And I maybe unintentionally leaned on it as an excuse for, this is why I can't do my homework, this is why I'm going to be the asshole in class, this is why I'm going to party and focus on these things that are important. And that's just what, and that combination with, people expecting me to be a certain way, I fucking lived up to those expectations. And those expectations were, like I just said, getting up to class, doesn't do well in school, cares about partying more than that. I've been able to, with my experience in my mental health journey, I used to freak the fuck out when things would go wrong as though it never happened before. Now I've gotten to the point where I can have these, peaks and valleys in my life occur and be able to be like, it's okay, I got this, and actually believe it and feel it. So for you, how has your mental health journey allowed you to prepare yourself for the bumps in the road and handle yourself better when things aren't as easy?
Well, I think for a long time, and we've talked about this a couple times over the last 2 weeks, for a long time, my relationship with the ADHD and all the other diagnoses, the general anxiety disorder, clinical depression, all that stuff, that I didn't give my meds a proper shot. I used those diagnoses as reasons to kind of say fuck the world, and then not honor the things that could have helped, that could have helped me earlier on, like therapy. Like I gave my mom, I had my parents come to therapy with me like 3 weeks ago. It was monumentally, positive for everybody involved. But my mom even said something that I echoed, something I say all the time. Like, I knew exactly what I was doing when I was going into these therapy sessions. I knew what I wanted. I knew how to get it out of it. This is before I was medication seeking or anything. Like, I knew what I was doing. I didn't take the medication, that sort of stuff. But I didn't factor any of that in to this kind of acceptance that I had, that I wish I had in all these other places in my life. The only place that I had it in my life for the longest time was that because of the stuff I knew about myself and because of how I felt and how I perceived other people to feel, like how I assumed all these other people around me felt, why Adderall worked for people the way that it did and didn't work for me the way that it was supposed to, or whatever. I had just accepted for a really long time that this false reality that some people are just meant to go through life more miserable than others, right? That some people aren't just, for the longest time I thought, I don't know when, but I'm gonna be, even before Robin Williams and Chris Cornell, but there were guys all through our lives growing up that just out of nowhere committed suicide.
Or at least from our point of view, out of nowhere.
From our point of view, yeah, right, exactly. That out of nowhere, because we didn't have a relationship with them, but then you'd find out after the fact. I always thought, I was like, one of these days, whether it's married with kids, I'm going to be in my bedroom, but I just thought, I'm just one of these unlucky fuckers, right? I'm just one of these guys that's just meant to go through life harder in between my ears than the next guy. I remember that with, even before I got sober, living with two of my best friends, different combinations of two of my best friends, but me and my best friend Alex Fechner, who I absolutely love and adore, admire in every way. He's programmed so differently than me, but a guy that was prescribed ADD meds, and that I could see these guys, even in college, get up on a Sunday and take their meds and get it together. And when I took it, it got me back to zero. Made these other guys, so for the longest time, my awareness of it was not actually an awareness at all. It was like a complete altered reality. It was like, it was almost this acceptance that I was fucked, which completely altered all my relationships with everybody. I met everybody where they're at in places that I was comfortable with, and then completely isolated entire other parts of my personality, entire other parts of who I was as a person.
So how has these experiences, how has seeing this been, so how are you able to use what you've experienced to make your life more manageable now? You see what I'm trying to ask? How?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the shit that we hated to hear whenever we were in high school, figuring out your learning styles.
Yep.
And if you're gonna study, set up a study space, that sort of, all that crap that we hated,
kind of
all
things.
that shit,
Right, right.
where they're driving home, that's like, it really is about your environment, it really is about this, it really is about that, like that sort of stuff. For me, you know, I had to start doing that with everything in my life, with eating. I had to start doing, like, what is the most enjoyable and efficient way for you to eat? Like, you know, food for many people, myself included, is drugs. And when I'm off on a day, 11 o'clock at night, I binge on sugar. I don't just manage my emotions, but I manage my appetite with it. Like, I have to, I've been forced to become an emotional planner. I know I know what's coming. I know what it is. It was working in the nightclub industry. I legitimately, if I had to be in at 10 o'clock on a busy night, I actually did not do anything. I maybe go to my parents' house for a little bit, but I wouldn't go to, all the industry kids would go to lunch and hang out with each other before work, or go get a cocktail, or they'd go to the zoo during the day and then work that night. I knew I only had enough in me for a shift. So all day Saturday, I'd work out, maybe by myself, maybe with one other person, and then I wouldn't leave my house. Every Friday and Saturday, any night that I had to be there, any day that I had to be there, you know, I'd start to plan for stuff like that, because I knew I only had a certain amount left before I would feel like I was falling apart. You know, the way that some people are like, oh, I can't eat that before I go to this because I'll be this. Like that I started to understand that, like, yo, your emotions are essentially the most important part of your functionality.
Yeah, man, I totally get that. One thing that is coming to mind when you're saying this stuff is, what I'm hearing is like preparation. And I think that, you know, when you were comparing yourself to the roommate who was able to take medicine, you know, ADD medicine or Ritalin or whatever, and it would like put them to a whole nother stratosphere of focus and these getting in the zone. And there's tons of people I know that are like that too. Usually people who aren't prescribed it take it from, you know, but preparation, right? And another thing I'm thinking of is, I look back at my experience as a younger person, and by no means am I unintelligent. By no means was there any reason I should have got at least a B or B average in high school. But I always felt, and I'm wondering if you feel this about things, that sometimes I would make things more difficult for myself than they needed to be, because I felt like it was supposed to be difficult. Do you resonate with that at all? Is that like, it's almost like, because I don't know if it's the way our brains are wired, and this is something that we've talked about too. It's like, the reason I feel comfortable relating to you is because, and I've said this before, I think I said it on mic before, but definitely to you in person, it's like, you are a 1,000 times version of me, meaning like the anxiety and the depression and the stuff that I feel and think is like, you're like the bigger version of it, like literally. So it's like, I guess what I'm saying is, with that in mind, do you ever feel like that because for some reason we think that things should be, I don't know if it's we think it should be difficult or what it is, but did you ever feel like that you made things more difficult? And what I think of when I say that is, like, when I used to have to like study for a test or do schoolwork, it was really simple. Like, they'd give you a worksheet, you'd open the book, you'd find the answers in the book, and then write them on the paper. It was very easy, but in my mind, it was like I was trying to make it 10 times more difficult than it needed to be. Like, well, I can't really articulate how I would make it more difficult, but in my head, it was like, it's like creating. When I'm have an idea in my head of what a photo should be or what a video should be or what this podcast should be, hence the third time we fucking recorded this, it's like, if it doesn't match that, it's a failure. And so, like, in the same way with schoolwork and things that were already kind of set up for success, in my mind, I would make it something bigger or harder than it was, to then feel like I've accomplished something or feel like that I've done something, when in reality, with certain things like school and like day-to-day life, you just gotta kind of like go with the pattern and go with what works and don't make it so. Do you
Absolutely.
feel that at all?
So the difference, the only difference between me and you in that is 1 out of every 6 times. So 1 out of every 6 times, something would click, and I would get what was meant to be a completely normal exercise, and I would get it done.
Yep.
Something would click. My medicine would hit the right time, or I'd get the right help, or I'd be in a good mood and I'd be focused. Something would click, and I would
dominate.
Feel like it was monumentally, like a monumental accomplishment that I got this entire worksheet done on time. It didn't end up in a crumbled ball at the bottom of my bag. I didn't have to do it 3 weeks late with my mom's help because I begged my teacher or whatever. But now those other 5 times, you said that you would make it to be, seem way harder in your head so that when you did do it, it was
Feel
accomplishment, right?
Right.
See, I was the opposite. I would make things exponentially harder so that it made more sense that I failed.
Interesting.
Right? So that it would give me this.
Just real quick though, I mean, I failed most of the time.
Right.
I'd make it so difficult that then I wouldn't accomplish it.
Right.
And then I'd feel bad about myself. Continue.
Absolutely. And as I got older and started to have like even more autonomy, what that led me to, and I used to talk about this in my AA talk, like in the rooms all the time, was then I became the kid that the only way shit was getting done was my way or the highway.
Mm-hmm.
So if I wasn't going to give anybody control, I wasn't going to give anybody the option to tell me that I was failing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if it was calculus, I would decide ahead of time, I'm not going to get this right.
Mm-hmm.
But I love feeling good about finishing shit
Mm-hmm.
too much. Like I love the A's that I get on these papers that I write too much. I'm not gonna not have that experience here. What do I have to do to get it? So instead of, like you said, spending the 7 hours or half an hour or 7 minutes, spending the simple yet taxing time to do it right,
Just to do
I
it the way.
probably would have got an A or B, right? And it would have been the best that I could have done. But instead, I would take 7 days to orchestrate stealing a test, getting the smart kid to fill it out, photocopying 5 different versions from a B- to an A+, selling them to all the kids in class so that everybody got good
Wow,
grades,
man.
sneaking it back into the desk, and then coming out with an A, and then saying, well, that counts for a lot.
Did you
in
actually
my
do that
opinion.
kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, in pre-calc. Mr. Weiss was the sweetest guy ever. I ran
you
that
would
guy
take
around.
tests?
Yeah. Because he
Isn't
would keep one copy of the main test
Wow.
on the days that we went over the pre-test, and he'd go, "Oh, I'm going to throw you one from the real test," and we would have a girl take him out in the hallway with having woman problems, like having menstrual stuff, and have him talk, like go out there and like fake cry. I'd run up there, and then I worked out of the principal's office, so I had hall passes. So I would go to the bathroom with a hall pass with the test, get it photocopied, and then at the end of class, while everybody was saying bye to Mr. Weiss, I would slide it right back up. The whole class was in on it.
That's incredible.
But it was like, that was how stubborn. That was like how stubborn I was. That it was like I'm gonna win. It may not look good, I'm gonna, it doesn't. If I'm supposed to finish the race in 40 seconds, and I know that I can't, well, then I'm going to find a way to make sure that everyone else finishes after me.
But what's interesting is that the fact that, relatively speaking, the fact that you got the whole class involved, and the fact that there was all these that still aligns with how. I mean, not to say it's in a shitty, sneaky way, but
no,
like,
but you're right. It aligns with my strengths.
It
and
aligns with
networking and connectivity.
exactly.
Yeah,
It's wild,
absolutely.
man.
Yeah.
So I want to transition now to the kind of the meaning and purpose of this podcast, right? I said kind of jokingly the other day, but it's not a joke. It's for like, I think our ultimate goal in a very succinct way is to be perceived as the cool mental health guys, right? Our goal with this podcast is to help be a part of destigmatizing and giving a relatable context to the reality of living with mental health issues or living with mental illness is what it really is. I even hate the word mental illness, but that's just what it is. For me, I feel like that I live with and function with a very relatable, average degree of mental health issues. I have anxiety and depression. I think that a lot of people have it, more so than are diagnosed, more so than know, more so than want to admit it. And part of the reason that I wanted to do this with you and do this with the group is that sometimes I feel a little bit like an imposter trying to talk about mental health, because I've never had any like extreme, comparing to your journey, extreme things go on. Now, have I been through some wild stuff? Sure, but we all have. But the reason I want to be a part of this and do this is because I wanted to show that you can still be perceived as an average, normal person and still live with things that are very, very difficult. And it's okay to be that way. And I feel like that by doing this, we are going to hopefully minimize the gut reaction for many people. I think it's mainly men, but men and women, to shy away from or not face their own mental health issues, right? I think that a lot more harm comes from not addressing even the most mild mental health things. I think that it's important to start teaching mental health and mental wellness in a much more profound way in all schools from a very young age. I feel like that mental health and mental wellness should be an absolute fundamental cultural, societal expectation for all of us to have it be on the forefront of what we're focusing on, because if we're not mentally sound, which is very attainable, we're fucked, right? So for you, I guess it's a two-part question. What is your motivation for doing this? And talk to me a little bit about your perception of how you think mental health should be viewed.
Well, my motivation is in line with, when I started getting the opportunity to talk to younger kids about recovery, I think that in kind of tapping into that network and connectivity thing that we talked about earlier, that there are a lot of conversations going on about recovery, the same way that there are a lot of conversations going on about mental health, and a lot of them are kind of going on independently of each other. Some are entirely too formal. You have the doctors of medicine, the science side. You have the social work side, the counselors and psychotherapists and social workers that are in the trenches and that are seeing this stuff firsthand. You have those afflicted, and then or those that are living with it, and then you have those that are living with those living with it. And all these conversations are kind of all happening with each other, but there's some of them really need intermediaries. And somebody has to come in at different points in time and be willing to speak informally and not speak politically correct and not speak about the science and use words like cool. One of the things that hit home the most with so many of the kids that I used to speak to was, I'd come in a snapback and Jordans and my pants hanging off my ass, and I'd drop the F-bomb, and I'd say, I'm not here to tell you not to get high. I'm only here to tell you that if you do get high and it leads you to anything like this, that you can reach out to me instead of McGruff the crime dog or Officer, or Officer Jones or Vice Principal Dickhead. Like that, you can hit somebody up that'll just chop it up with you, and then maybe that person can vouch for a professional that will actually do, because I think one thing that puts kids off from the mental health, from even participating in the conversation at all, is that their parents are choosing their therapists, right? And then they're going in and then they're talking to this fucking dweeb, or they're talking to this whatever, where it's like they're now, like, there's a ton of me. Like, some of the guests that we're going to have on are going to be these insanely, like, people that are cooler than in every... Actually cool. Like, in every variation of the word. That are cool, that are young, that are cool, that are hip, that are hot, that are whatever the superficial societal, cultural, perceptions of image that we place, that they meet all of those standards too.
And they're good people, caring, loving, empathetic.
Like, my therapist, for lack of a better term, my therapist is a fucking ace. She's beautiful. It's not why I go see her, but there are people that matters to. Sure. When I was a kid, I didn't want to talk to my parents. I didn't want to talk to their peers. I was like, why the fuck am I talking to you, Sharon? Like, I don't want to talk, like, put me in, it's what guys align more whenever their PO is somebody that seems like their peer. It may, and I think that part, I think that informalizing carefully, respectfully, and with professional guidance, which is like what we're making sure to continue to do, and hold ourselves accountable professionally, so that we're not doing damage and that we're not being reckless with this. But the point is still to informalize the conversation so that it can reach a larger base comfortably. I love that, man. And then the end game being invite you into the conversation, and if something sticks out for you or someone that you care about, provide you with resources that you're comfortable with. The amount of people that roll their eyes at the suicide hotline, I get it. Why would I call a 1-800 number to get help? It seems so impersonal. But there's not really anybody out there on a large scale that's driving home that, like, I'm on the other end of that motherfucking call. Like, if you pick up that phone, you're not talking to fucking, Dr. Schreiber. You're fucking talking to... You're dropping the best names today, by the way. Just like, they're great. Grabbing anybody that I resented growing up and putting their last name in. I get you. But I mean, you're really talking to people that actually just have unconditional care, unconditional love, and that will put you in the right places because they do know what it's like to have been there. And I think that's also really important too, for me to continue to remind myself that, like, I'm not in a position of power. I'm not in a position of, like, if I'm gonna be in a position of influence, I have to continue to educate myself so that influence is helpful. Like, if we are gonna put ourselves in a position where we want to influence, we have to be influenced by people that know more than us, and then we have to figure out how to basically digest it and baby bird it to people that that can't chew it up yet. You know,
one thing you're talking about here a lot is feeling connected and being able to relate to each other. Whether that comes in the form, I mean, some kids may feel more. Some people, kids, young people who may feel comfortable going to like a very buttoned up.
Right.
Professional,
more formal,
dweeby, right?
Yeah,
but the idea is, I always say in my other podcasts that we're all connected, and that's the idea is like I do truly believe that like we are all connected. I believe that when you allow yourself to share a story, to talk to someone, to put your own lens and judgments to the side, I almost guarantee it that if any two people talk for more than 15 or 20 minutes in a relatively willing, open way, you will find connection very, very quickly in ways that you probably wouldn't have ever considered it. And I think that what you're talking about, bringing it back to the mental health side, is and therapy and help and trusting people. It's about connecting, trusting, and being able to relate to each other.
Right.
And that comes in many different forms. And I think that it's so important. I think that another reason why that I want to do this is to to reinforce the idea of like, we are all connected. Allow yourself to find the people you connect with. Allow yourself to trust people, and it may not work out all that perfect, but going back to what we said, that may be part of the journey. It's like I may trust whoever person A, and they burn me, or maybe I burn them, but there's always going to be person B, C, D. There's a never ending bucket of opportunity to connect, relate, and trust and be trusted, right? So for you, how does feeling connected? We already know that you are a very connectivity person. That's not the right phrase, but yeah, connectivity driven. So for you, what is the value of connection and connecting to people and relating to people in your life?
Well, you couldn't have set me up better for this anecdote. It's told in a lot of different fashions. But as it pertains to mental health and addiction, there's a kid and he's stuck in a well, right? And he's clinically depressed and he's an alcoholic and he can't get out of this well. And his mom walks by and sees him down in the well and asks him if he needs any help, and he says yeah, and she showers him with love and affection and tells him that he's worth everything and that she'll always take care of him, and then she walks off, and his dad comes up and tells him, asks him if he needs help, and tells him that he needs to work harder, he needs to work harder, and that he believes him in, and that he's proud of him, and then he walks off, and then a therapist comes up and stands at the top of the well and asks him what's wrong, and he tells her what's wrong, and she writes it on a sheet of paper and tells him to meditate and to do these things. He's still in this well. Doctor comes by, same thing. Doctor throws him down a bunch of pills, right? And then there's a guy walking on the way to the well, and on the way to the well, he talks to all these people, and they say, hey, there's this, my kid's down here, he's caught in the well. And this guy has all these conversations with all these people, the parents, the family, the doctors, the psychotherapists, whatever. He stands at the top of the well, he looks down at the kid, he's like, yo, what's going on? And the kid's like, I'm stuck down in this well. And the guy goes, oh, well, I'm clinically depressed too, and I'm a recovering addict. I've been there before. And he hops down in the well, and he shows the kid how to get out. Dude,
I just got chills, man. That's a great...
And I think that this that this podcast for us is like we're
going down in the well, man.
But we're going down in the well after having talked to all these people,
right?
We're not saying that those people can't help, because all that stuff does help, but it doesn't help until you get out of the fucking well. Those notes don't, meditating and somatic therapy and transcendental meditation and all the things that we love and that we're trying to get more into, and fucking drinking my greens in the morning and working out and all that shit, it doesn't work until somebody has instilled like legitimate hope, legitimate belief, legitimate faith that like things do get better.
Hell yeah.
And then once you're out of the well, then it's like, okay, now
I can receive the love. I can receive the therapy. I can receive. Dude, I love that. And that's where we're going to go ahead and wrap this up, because that was a great way to end it, because I feel like that we should have called this podcast The Well or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But I love that. So I feel like that.
I kind of like the cool mental health guys. I'm gonna start signing all Instagram
cool
posts.
Mental health guys. So this is episode 4, guys. Candidly, this is the third time we've done this. The first time was a technical issue. Second time was a technical issue. And I feel like, just like we talked about earlier in the episode, like everything happens for a reason. We had to fuck up those 2 times to get to this conversation, which I think has been without a doubt better than the first 2.
By far.
So, as always, we're on Instagram at @so_much_podcast. We're on YouTube. The link to that's in our bio on the podcast. He's at DNA_Mac300, right? I'm at DZ_STL. Like we always say, this is not, if you feel like what we're doing is cool, if you're into what we're doing, please like, subscribe, share, all that stuff. And otherwise, I think that's all we got for this episode. Thank you, Mac.
And shout out D. Lee for the Poetic Blends hoodie. We'll talk about all this stuff in Fit Check. You guys will get to hear that first. And Danny was signing off, but I can't let this go without making sure to say big love to everybody. See you guys soon.